Hello, today I'm reviewing Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, a 1968 novel by Phlip K Dick. I'm sure most of you, perhaps all of you, probably all of you, will know that this novel was the basis for the movie Blade Runner. The movie and the book are quite different, and the book deals with its themes slightly different again, though those themes are consistent with Dick's normal fare, namely the nature of reality and humanity. And it really wastes no time in exploring that. The story takes place in a post-Earth future. World War Terminus has left the Earth shrouded in radioactive dust and in an advanced state of decay. The casualties, we were told, were vast, and coupled with post-war emigration to planetary colonies, that's left huge tracts of the country barely populated by anything other than an eerie emptiness. This is actually quite an interesting switch. It is a lot easier to pick up a sci-fi novel from the 50s and 60s that considered overpopulation would be a bigger problem in the future. On emigration, colonists are granted an android to assist them with the work and loneliness of the outer worlds. The TV advert encouraging emigrants specifically links the android's lot to slavery, claiming it duplicates the halcyon days of the pre-Civil War southern states, either as body servants or tireless field hands. Occasionally, one of the androids goes rogue, and they are then hunted by bounty hunters. The novel's protagonist, Deckard, is one such bounty hunter. He is, however, more like a bureaucrat than an action hero. He is the local police department's second fiddle, called in only after their first call, Dave Holden, is shot, hunting a group of cutting-edge and escaped androids. The call to work interrupts Deckard from rowing with his wife about which artificial mood they should experience that day, and from feeding his robotic sheep. Future world is dominated by a religion called mercerism, which is based entirely around empathy. Empathy for a shrouded figure climbing a hill and beset by unseen enemies, and particularly through caring for animals. Owning an animal is a difficult and expensive proposition in the post-war world, but being seen to care is essential. Deckard has a robot sheep because his real one died and he can't afford a replacement. Finding a real animal is something of an obsession for him, but not having one, his awkward relationship with his wife, and his middling position at work, they all set Deckard up as one of Dick's fairly typical protagonists. He's certainly not much of an action hero. His first job is to head to the HQ of the escaped androids manufacturers and prove that the empathy-based Voight-Kampff test used to identify androids will work on their new model, the Nexus 6, and he uses one of them on a test subject called Rachel. The company attempts unsuccessfully to discredit the test, and Deckard returns to San Francisco. He is met by one of the Nexus 6 and retires it. He visits the second Nexus 6 at an opera where she is performing, but she causes a scene which ends up in him getting arrested. He's then taken to a different police station, and for a moment there is this sense that perhaps this is an alternative reality, but it turns out to be a ruse by that town, which seems to have a significant number of androids in key positions, including the chief of police, who is on Deckard's list of Nexus 6s. With the help of that station's bounty hunter, they retire the chief and head back to Deckard's station. The second bounty hunter, Phil Resch, has issues with empathy that are so serious that there are a number of suggestions around this point that bounty hunting would be a great profession for androids themselves. Resch passes the Voight-Kampff, however, though that test has some questions over its validity already anyway. Resch and Deckard then retire the second Nexus 6 at an art exhibit. Deckard, now really concerned by the amount of empathy he feels for the androids, enlists Rachel's help to hunt the remaining 3. However, that help consists of them having sex, with her confessing that she has done this many times before and does so to put bounty hunters off their job. Deckard goes after the final 3, who are hiding in a dilapidated apartment building with J.R. Isidore, a human degenerated by the radioactive dust and regarded himself as subhuman. It is him, though, that seems to show the most obviously human characteristics in the book, both in his revulsion towards Deckard and the work that he does, and that he tries to protect the androids until their lack of empathy manifests itself as animal cruelty. Deckard arrives in the middle of a spiritual crisis, but retires the final 3 without significant hardship. He returns home to discover that Rachel has murdered his pet goat, but clutching a new animal, a toad, that turns out to be fake, he does, however, have a new perspective on life with his wife. Overall, Do Androids Dream is a slower, less action-driven tale than the movie based on it. The first act feels quite long. There's quite a lot going on, and so much of it is full of interesting concepts, but it isn't terribly gripping. The scene where Deckard and his wife, Iran, squabble over which artificial emotion they want from their machine is not terribly exciting, even as it sows a lot of the seeds for the discussions to follow on what truly makes us human. I think there are 2 significant ways in which this novel isn't quite of the same standard as Ubik, which I reviewed on this channel a year or so ago. The first is that the first act here simply isn't as good as the first act there. That's not to say it's bad, but Ubik had interest in its story and its themes, but it was also a great satire. Androids really only had me interested in its themes. It offers no discernible attempts at humour, and its story is rather pedestrian, serving the theme rather than supporting it. The second is that overall it lacks a standout moment, that one gut-punching scene or image that would truly elevate it. The scene where Deckard sleeps with Rachel seems rather like a teen fantasy, whereas Ubik has its protagonist dragging himself to his death as his own flesh peels off his bones. Quite a contrast. In the second half of the novel, the story of Do Androids Dream comes more to the fore, and a considerable weight of its discussion on the true meaning of humanity, therefore, is dragged along with it. That exploration is so powerful that, in fact, despite what I've just said, I think that Androids might even be the stronger novel. Whereas the question that surrounds the film adaptation is Deckard a replicant? The question this novel poses is something more akin to, does it matter if he is? Or at least, what is human anyway? So just a little delve into the trivial then. But it begins with the opening scene where he argues with his wife, in itself a fairly typical human activity, but over which artificial emotion they should feel. Deckard selects a positive open-mindedness designed to improve his performance at work, while Iran selects a deep depression against his objections. She tells him hers is the natural or human reaction to the bleak post-war reality around them, and his failure to recognise that is an absence of the appropriate effect, a term used in the diagnosis of various disorders centred around the emotions. From there, Deckard tends to his robot sheep, but at this point he has no empathy for the artefact. His display of such is a pretense, a subterfuge to convince his neighbours that he can feel the empathy required of him in mercerism. I've put as much time and attention to caring for it as I did when it was real, but almost. You feel the same doing it, but you have to keep your eye on it exactly as you did when it was really alive, because they break down and then everybody in the building knows. His claims of empathy then are qualified by the adverb almost, but then he candidly reveals it is purely a matter of appearances. But if there is an artificial basis under the emotions, the Penfield machine and the android sheep, the brilliance of the writing is that contrast with the humanity, the simple humanity of a man and his wife arguing. 13 pages in, and the story hasn't really begun in any meaningful way, but its ideas and concepts are already irresistible. The importance of empathy, demonstrated by compassion for animals, becomes an obsession for Deckard. He's rarely removed from his price guide, and the Rosen Association test his morality with an owl rather than a cash bribe. The owl is later revealed to be fake anyway, but it reveals that Deckard's motivation is one of proving himself rather than bettering himself. If the androids are regarded as slaves and animals revered, it makes the position of John Isidore all the more curious. He's regarded as degenerated, as subhuman, and receives more scorn than empathy from his fellows. They call him a chickenhead. There's also another substrata of degenerated humans called antheads, but Isidore is the only one to meaningfully feature in the text. He demonstrates the most identifiably human behaviour of anyone in the novel. He's immediately protective of Pris after he finds her in the otherwise abandoned apartment building. It's also quite clear, in contrast to the awkwardness of Deckard and Iran's marriage, that his is the more human relationship, one of sharing tangible things such as wine and food, rather than electronically modified moods. Having failed an IQ test, though, he's barred from emigration and consigned to live on Earth and eventually succumb to the enervating dust. He's also barred from marriage so that his genes are not passed on, despite his clumsy courting of Pris, which, again, is particularly human. He also shares Iran's appropriate human reaction to the world's unnerving silence. Even the androids he protects half-mockingly consider him a credit to his race. But his marginal fail of the IQ test is mentioned only shortly after Rachel Rosen's marginal fail of the Voight-Kampff empathy test. The two marginal failures, then, are barred from humanity by an arbitrary scale rather than being an obvious or distinct separate species. Further doubts are cast on the Voight-Kampff test itself, when it's suggested there are a number of humans who might actually fail it, those for whom empathy is more difficult. But the distinct lack of empathy that the other humans of the book show its most human character conveys that it's not only the near failures that demonstrate if empathy is the human's distinctive characteristic, a distinct lack of humanity. One such near failure is Paul Resch, the other bounty hunter whose own lack of empathy, manifested in an unpleasant enjoyment of retiring androids, leads even him to question whether he's truly human. He kills the Nexus 6 Luba Luft. Luft is Humanized by her connection to humanity's finest art, she's a high-class opera singer, and her admiration of fine art at the museum causes Deckard to empathize with her. After Esh kills her, Deckard is moved to question his own role. They can use androids. Much better if Andy's do it. I can't do any more. I've had enough. She was a wonderful singer. This planet could have used her. This is insane. Yet Luft herself admitted her performance was mere facsimile. I don't really like androids. Ever since I got here from Mars, my life has consisted of imitating the human, doing what she would do, acting as if I had the thoughts and impulses a human would have, imitating, as far as I'm concerned, a superior life form. Yet her fakery is still a better representation of humanity than Resh, the actual human who kills her in response to her goading. He is a borderline psychopath, but passes the Voight-Kampff test. Suspect as the test is, Deckard takes the test also, proving that he can feel empathy for androids, which in truth had been clear from his initial reaction to Luke's performance at the opera. However, it raises the interesting proposition that Deckard at this point has displayed more empathy towards the artificial than he has to the humans around him. His relationship with his wife and Resh are distinctly cold, while his admiration of Luft and attraction to Rosen are far more clear. After retiring Luft and sparing Resh, Deckard buys a goat that he can't really afford, even with the bounties he's so far collected. The need to prove his empathy for the real is now an obsession that he cannot ignore. Such is the pull of the beast that he travels in an elevator with Iran to show her the goat, and Dick writes, together they moved nearer to God. The moral sapping fakery is over. The two experience the first human warmth of the book. Though Iran's recollection of A Waltz by Strauss serves as a simultaneous reminder of the demise of Luft. Deckard sees the goat as proof of his humanity, though, and as Rachel observes, he loves it far more than he does his wife or her. That will inspire Rachel herself, though, to her most human moment. The calculated manipulation she has used on numerous bounty hunters in the past fails on Deckard. And when he leaves her to hunt for the last of the Nexus Sixes, she takes some very human revenge on his animal. It's a particularly interesting moment. The lack of empathy if seen as inhuman, and mirrored as it is by the other androids giving themselves away when they maim Isidore's spider, contrasts with the identifiably human nature of revenge, and it comes after Deckard has observed her, compared her to the Cro-Magnon, one of the race of tall hunters. Perhaps then the empathy can also be seen as a limiting factor. Certainly the novel has a distinct streak of Darwinism in its rejection of Isidore's degenerated genes, Deckard's lead codpiece protecting his, the outward projection of mankind into the stars, the ever-onward journey upwards of Mercer himself. But if the Nexus 6 is the Cro-Magnon, is it not designed to eventually outlive its immediate competitor? Despite the pedestrian pace of the opening act, the sheer weight of this novel is irresistible. The question of Deckard's humanity that dogged film lovers for many years is here pushed to the periphery in favour of the rather harder to answer, does it matter if he is or not? Once again, there are no easy answers, and Dick doesn't really offer any, preferring instead to initiate a conversation between reader and the written word that is far too rare in modern and lesser science fiction. Dick's writing style here is less polished than it is in Ubik, and probably also than it is in The Man in the High Castle, with this offering from page 83 almost horrible enough to count as Wendig-esque. Whisked nippity-nip up into the sky. But positioned on the previous page, we have this princely alliterative proposition. Her voice sank into a dreary drone of despond. In truth, if I was alliterating to convey despondency, I'd avoid such a hard consonant in favour of somewhat softer sound, maybe some sibilants such as a sorrowed sombre slur, or cheat somewhat with a hollow listless lament. But there's still enough going on in the prose to make it interesting. Regardless of your opinion on alliteration, the decaying near-empty world here doesn't have quite the same development as that of Ubik. But even if the novel lacks a little punch, its questions will remain in the mind long after you put it down. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a remarkable novel, and one that I highly recommend. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, there are others on the channel. You'll probably, if you like this one, enjoy my review of Ubik, which is a lot shorter. I'll try and remember to link it in the description. In the meantime, goodbye. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.